is our second roundtable, and for this particular session, we have participants dialing in from Perth, Australia, and also from Indianapolis, from the Indiana University, Purdue School of Engineering, Indianapolis campus. Dr. Scott Deal's lab, and Rod is in the back representing the lab, and he has been working very hard. Just to recap what I introduced yesterday, that most of the sessions that took place in this hall have been documented, although they are not available in public links, except for the keynotes and the roundtable discussion. If you would like to review your session, which took place in this hall, you can ask me or ask Rob, and then he will send you the link. Then you can have a look to see, perhaps, eventually you would like to have that uploaded. Once I have a chance to review the documentation, we will most likely put together a short version to sort of capture all the highlights of the symposium. So I'll be in touch about that. If you somehow do not wish to have your session, your presentation published, please come and see me if you can, or write me an email. That'd be great. So just want to take a minute. Yes, hi. Hi, Scott. That's Scott. And hi, Luis. Thank you for staying up. This is past midnight. You look so awake. Thank you for dialing in. Did you guys have a chance to see Steve's talk? Okay. So I thought that we would start the roundtable with sort of questions and feedback from Steve's talk. That will be our starting point. Do we have any questions or comments from the house, or from Luis or Scott?
Hello, hi over there. I have just a very technical question. Knowing in Suite, how did you divide the groups with the wall? Were you?
The actual practical and physical division was that equal number, or roughly equal numbers, were on the north side of the border in the south. And of course, as you know, because you're about to present it, and by the way, let me interrupt myself to say that with John last year, a couple of years ago, I made a Nookswood performer's guide. And so, you know, just like from the experience of the number of performances I've done, and so I'm happy to send it to you or to anyone who would like it. I mean, it's just one person's view of the problems we've run into, just really nuts and bolts stuff. But there's that if you would like it. And so, yeah, the border wall at the San Diego border, right along the beach where that garden is a mesh fence. So you can sort of see through it, and you can certainly hear through it. So the rehearsal was hard because, you know, it's already hard enough to rehearse that piece when you can walk around and see people, but we were doing that by having, I think Ryan was at the border, and I was passing messages, and we were kind of going back and forth like that. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but equal numbers on either side of the border.
Anyone else? No. Okay. Yes, please.
So yesterday there were some remarks about the progress that has been realized in having a more comprehensive and structured curriculum for percussion. And today on our session, where there were discussions on percussion as a way of expression for movements driven by. Okay, so for movements driven by persons to expressing in the realms of other social dimensions. So There were some remarks about different ways in which percussion can be presented, either directed and from the research by Torino on participatory ways for percussion. So the question that I have is if the modalities for interactive percussion where non-percussionists perform, do you consider them as an art form? And if you do you see opportunity to increase the educational resources at your faculties or in general? That's my question.
So, if we think back about sort of how percussion came about, so like earlier today or yesterday, somebody talked about Cage's early days, how the members of the group were not percussionists, and actually our literature was born out of participatory by non-percussionists, non-trained. So there is a history of how this boundary has been more blurred than many other sort of instrumental learning institutions. But as we progress and become sort of more, the field has marched in different ways, and one branch of the field has marched closer to sort of this conservatory training or the research institution training, which kind of diverted the initial participants into different kind of cohorts. And I do think that this is a very interesting ways that various sectors have been trying to engage. So depending on where you are and what your institution's missions are, so non-professional, amateur participant can be part of the mandate and an important part of the mandate. But I do feel like in each institution there are certain limitations in terms of how big a cohort of groups that one can serve. So depending on where you are in your work, you may or may not be able to be completely inclusive of all groups that want to participate in this field. Does it answer your question? Anyone else?
I'd say just briefly.
I have another sort of follow-up in a slightly different direction. So if you've got an answer, please.
Just very briefly, I would say that since we have the possibility of hitting things and many different things available for us to make percussion sounds, I think that the possibility of including non-professionals, musicians into our practice, it's a great opportunity to kind of spread the word and to get more people close to what we do, and maybe help us also have a different kind of audience and a different kind of practitioner, a different kind of percussionists who would eventually be part of the community. So I think it's a part that is difficult to come to realization if you are working in an educational institution, because of course we all want to have here professionals and we need to have people with previous training, but again this opportunity to bring in other people out of it can be a productive way to make a broader echo of what we do.
Thank you. I'll just add briefly to the same thing, is that I think this is one of the huge strengths of our art, that it communicates almost immediately to people that anybody can do it. And for a long time, and I guess I'm talking a little bit about the Percussive Art Society here, there was this thought that we needed to put on the cloak of an aristocratic instrument, as though, you know, this is to prove to everybody that this was really hard to do and that a percussionist was worthy, somebody who could do this was just as good as a musician. And in the meantime, we've kind of lost track of the sight that when you see somebody play a drum, the thought in an audience or a listener that I could do that too is a way of shortening the distance between the player and the audience and strengthening the sense of contact. So I think even in a piece, virtuosic piece of some of which we heard yesterday, the idea that an audience member can really see and grasp the mechanics of playing, even if they actually can't come up and play Cajon like Terry did, and you know, like everybody did last night, like Aiyun's version of the beautiful piece that she played. Even if they can't do that, the idea that they think they can is a strengthening thing. With respect to Inuksuit in particular, this is a question that we often deal with. Can non-musicians or can non-percussionists play this piece? To some extent they can in the group A that involves the sirens and the conch shells, but John, and I agree with him on this, has really resisted the idea that this is a kind of come one, come all, you know, as Cage said, here comes everybody, kind of thing. On the other hand, what we're going to do for the next festival that I'll organize, the San Diego Symphony asked me to organize another festival. This was, the original one was a part of the San Diego Symphony Festival in 2018. They asked me to do the 2021 festival, and we're going to commission, or commission is really not even the right word, get sort of marching protest music. This is why I want to talk to Aiyun about this afterwards. So that we'll walk from the 32nd parallel, which is in the middle of Tijuana, to the 33rd parallel, which is in Del Mar, California, across the border with the banda caravan of people playing pots, pans, and drums and things like that. And for that, amateurs, come one, come all, is really going to be the way. Just have to see how much trouble we can get into before they shut it down.
So, today we brought, actually this is all by surprise, we organized the participants 5 minutes before the session started, sorry, this is my fault. But I thought it would be interesting to bring out some people whose main gig is not playing percussion, but who have been with us in the past 2 days. So I asked Griffin, composer, to come on, and also Roberto to come on. So here I want to open up with a question kind of similar to yesterday, but to ask for your sort of feedback and your observation about what has been happening in percussion that stands out as being sort of countercultural and sort of innovative in leading a way of the way that music is being made today, and how do you feel like from your perspective we have participated and will continue to participate in directing the future of contemporary music and art?
Well, my artistic practice really grew out of my experiences in very lengthy rehearsals with Aiyun, and really it's not the instruments for me that is very inspirational. It's the body of the percussionist and the musculature and the athleticism that they seem to master in a way that is just not true with any other instrument, as far as I know. And so this had a tremendous, I mean, most of my work from 2001 until 2012 is based in, you know, rehearsals with actors with metronome for hours and hours and hours, learning these physical gestures that, you know, really came from understanding how percussionists, you know, have a different setup that they have to train their muscles to kind of know and be able to feel through, especially like with improvisation, you know. And so for me, that's sort of a major thing, but also, you know, percussionists they can do all kinds of different things. You can put them on stage, they can scream, they can do all these things that a lot of other people, you know, like a harpist probably wouldn't do. So that's sort of been my, you know, the foundation of, you know, over a decade of work for me. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Well, for me it's been quite an interesting approach to work with percussionists. I mean, I'm a composer originally. I'm in traditional scene training, but then I do also all sorts of improvisation and electronic music, and basically live electronic music, basically. And I feel like I mean, all this repertoire of sounds that you can grab on percussion is so wide, so interesting that for me, personally is like the future to explore, to go with percussion and electronics and live electronics. I mean, that's something that I'm really interested in doing that. And as a matter of fact, I'm working with the band this late 2 years around improvising and exploring different timbres, different ways of capturing gestures. That's, I think, what seduced me more. The idea of capturing gestures in the percussion is that the way they approach the marimbas or any type of drums, and just or how they approach that, and they put some accelerometers in there, and they have that data as processes of what is interpretation, and make a little more warmer the way electronics can interact with these devices. And certainly it opens like a very interesting branch of probably another type of, I'm seeing it now, how percussionists are becoming more composers than they think in the way they improvise and the way they do things about this. And also, I find it more crazier than regular composition or contemporary music. I mean, I'm living this congress now, and I'm really very pleased of what happened with the guys of Veracruz playing with the jaws of burros, and I mean that is great. I mean, for me it's very refreshing to listening to all this type of different movements, and as Griffin as Sean was telling you, this idea that they are capable of shouting and doing any sorts of things, perhaps even some acrobatics around the percussion is so great. So for me, this is a very exciting moment as a composer.
I've worked with a lot of your students, and I'm always like, I want to see Schick change because, I think that when it comes to improvisation, that there's a unique position for percussionists. Like when I do a traditionally scored piece, I usually leave a significant amount of improvisation space for the percussionists that I work with, because I trust them and because they're really great. Like I've worked with Aiyun forever, and I mean those two premiered my first percussion piece. So I've been very lucky to maintain access and a creative relationship with this group of international percussion weirdos. And like when I talk about sometimes when I'm teaching, I was like, well, I don't think your piece is weird enough. I can always rely on percussionists to bring this kind of weird other quality to, especially when they're improvising. So it's been a wonderful, enriching. It enriches all of my visual art as well, just in terms of the relationship to the body and choreography. And it's kind of like seeing Aiyun play a really strong piece is like watching the gymnastics, the balance beam gymnastics, where there's these elegant gestures that are hit on point. They have to hit these specific poses, and they create these elegant flows in between them. But there's this percussive hit on each gesture, and this is why this is where a lot of my work came from.
Okay, I have a topic and a question directed to Diego here, and to eventually Luis, who is still awake in Australia. So maybe if you want to comment after Diego, would be great. So speaking of this theme of the roundtable directions, the directions where we are heading, and all that, I wanted to know your ideas and your perspective, and what else, of course, because I know your work, and I've seen you actually. I saw you almost start on percussion some years back, and I have seen your career go very high, which is really great. And I've seen the kinds of things you've done, and I know what things you do now, all those things. So I think you have an interesting perspective on exactly what do you think is the direction that we are heading as percussionists and as artists, or if there's any, or if we have to have one? What do you think?
Thank you. We should have one. That's it. For many, I think it's healthy to have many cross points open to go in different directions. That's the way I see it. Yeah, I was about to talk about this idea of percussionists as composers. And in my experience, I know you guys, but in the last years, more and more the composers I collaborate with through years, not like just one piece, or sometimes 5 pieces, 4 pieces. That becomes like family, and it becomes like you were talking about in Nuxuit, that it was a present for your wedding. I mean that's clear, no? The boundary, the boundaries between you and John. But other composers, sometimes when I have the cases now, in 2 weeks we're performing in a different festival. I just got a piece and the composer is saying like, do whatever you want, take away some notes, and it's basically giving me, all the freedom to really decide and to criticize. And it's not the case with every composer, of course, but I think, this is happening more and more, and I will be throwing back to the composers this question, because sometimes it's difficult for them, I find, to accept this sort of equal level. Of course, we are trained in a different way, right? We are. I did study a bit of composition. I don't make a living as a composer, but which is a very different thing, right? But this is happening more and more, and I think I see more new generations of percussionists and musicians who are pretty much they are with the technology. With your phone, you can create a video and edit a loop, or just in a few seconds, and this enables you to create in a very, very fast way and to actually promote it and share it. So I think the way I see it is I see this direction of becoming both very, very marked in what could be in the future in any institution, like percussionists actually going to composition seminars, which doesn't happen so often, I think, and it's very healthy. And so that's one point of view. Another point of view is experimenting. So we're used to experimenting in our practice as percussionists, but I think we still can stretch the boundaries more and more. I feel that we are still learning. Of course, it's good. I think it's healthy. We learn the basics of technique, of mallet instruments, and many different things. But to really have a course on sound, on technology, on looking at music and sound from a different perspective, really like more a compositional one, and art history as well, politics. So I think I'm very, very happy that this is happening here in Transplanted Roots.
Yesterday at dinner, I was talking with Karen, and she said, well, Aiyun told me that anytime she didn't like something, that you could just tell Sean that it's stupid. And you would change it. Like that kind of, because I think that, I don't think that, like, for me, this is, the question that I brought up yesterday at the panel, which wasn't really the rest was this idea of progression and kind of having an idea to build a foundation and a direction. But I don't feel that way, and I don't structure anything that way. I believe in moving through things intuitively and letting things grow organically, especially when someone tells you that what you wrote is stupid.
Okay, Luis, would you care to comment? Hold on 1 second.
Now try talking.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, here's the mic. Can you try talking now, Luis?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yep, I can see nods. Okay, all right, I might speak a bit. I think there might be some similarities maybe between Aiyun's question about what has percussion contributed and Huang's question about what will percussion be contributing. And it's reminding me of a conversation I've had with some colleagues in the group I work with very recently about hierarchies in music and what the most important structural features of music is, depending on which perspective you're coming from, what genre you work in, what instruments you play in. In this particular group, we work often with musicians who are not from a Western art music tradition. They might be punk musicians or rock musicians or electronic artists who don't read music, or they might read another form of music. So we look for ways to understand each other's decisions and choices in making music. And something that I think is a really big difference are the things that we prioritise when we think about pitch, rhythm, structure, dynamics, timbre, whatever the main features of these music are. Often in Western art music, it's pitch and rhythm that are at the top of the hierarchy tree, but maybe in electronic music, or the electronic musicians that I've worked with, the things that are most important tend to be dynamics and texture instead. So if you're listening to one form of music with a hierarchy in different order, sometimes it can be difficult to communicate with each other. And that's, I think, something that percussion music has contributed to in the 20th century, is a way of making music that asks audiences and makers to listen to some of the other features of music. So not just pitch and rhythms, but texture and timbre and dynamics and those sorts of things. And I think they're the features of percussion music that are going to be the most important as the genre develops. And of all of the branches of percussion music that Aiyun was talking about, I think one of those branches might be experimental percussion music, and where I think it might be going into an area that is starting to be termed post-instrumental practice, so moving away from more familiar instruments to make new instruments or make new ways of approaching instruments in order to explore these other ideas.
Great, thank you. Can we actually also get Scott to respond to this? Because I people want to hear about your thought on this, since you are sort of leading counterculture, but in a slightly different direction.
Okay.
Scott, your mic is muted.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Test. Do we get the... Let's put that holds. Hold on 1 second. I was gearing myself just to be listening. I'm in the lab here. And I've been half listening to the conversation, but also half taking notes on our work. So I'll do my best here. In my life, first of all, it's really great to be part of this, and really enjoyed the last presentation, Steve, your keynote. lots to think about, and it's been terrific hearing the performances over the weekend, giving me a lot to think about, in addition to these systems we're developing. But I think in my lifetime, I've noticed such an explosion into all of society of the world of percussion. When I was young, it was kind of hard to access. I was a kid growing up in the military, moving everywhere, and I always kind of wanted to get involved, but it seemed hard to get to. But now as an adult, in over 50 years, 57 years, to see trained percussionists in so many different genres than when I was a child, it gives me lots of optimism. Now the area in particular that I work in a lot is electroacoustics and electronic music, and then networked systems like we're doing today. And the same over the past 20 years has been pretty amazing. And I would agree with Louise that with the electronic realm, it's more looking at textures and sound structures and volumes and transients as opposed to harmonic systems and rhythms. And I think we're just at the beginning of that, and especially as we look at another aspect that's being integrated in now is artificial intelligence and machine learning, how it deals with these systems and how it reads them, and then how we as humans interact with those artificial intelligence systems to still make them compelling for an audience. So I have a lot of optimism about it. I think I like to tell my students that it's sort of like I imagine the musical horizon we're at right now is, especially with electronics, it's kind of like if we were airplane pilots and it was 1910. The airplane's been around for not quite a decade. It's got a long way to go, but it sure is fascinating.
Thank you. With the comment, let's open up for more comments from the hall before we break for lunch. Please, Gina.
It's actually related a little bit to yesterday. A couple of months ago, I was sitting with the director of a really fantastic festival, and she was saying how surprised she was how few female artists had applied. And I don't think about that often, and I should, but I just don't really give it much thought because I just applied for all kinds of things. And I was really struck yesterday with how many female performers were on stage. So I've got two questions really because of that, and it moved me deeply. Really, as a female percussionist, I just thought this is really neat. And it's not to diminish all of the amazing performances I've heard from my male counterparts, but just, so my question is, was that deliberate? Because I think that's very unusual, actually, that there's so many females programmed yesterday, and was that part of, just the counterculture? But the other question then is, do you think that we need mechanisms in place to ensure that voices are heard and always include dialogue, or do you think that this will happen organically? Those are two different questions.
Okay, let's put Louise on first.
I hope you can hear me again. It's a really great question, and I'd love to jump in and get into it just because I happened to have run a conference on gender diversity in music just a couple of months ago, and this topic came up quite regularly. I can't speak for the programming for transplanted groups, but I know that in contemporary music in Australia, gender diversity in programming has become a real focus. It's something that's at the forefront of everyone's mind when programming concerts, and it's something that people deliberately, I think, are aware of in programming concerts. I certainly am in programming my student ensemble, Pinata Percussion, because more than half of my students are female, and I want to make sure that we're getting in female visiting artists and programming works by female composers to provide my young students with role models that they otherwise may not see. And I just want to mention very briefly how important this presence of role models is and representation from my perspective as a female percussionist. In that I invited Robin Schulkowski and Vanessa Tomlinson out to perform at this conference. And we performed Robin's work, Armadillo. And it wasn't until the concert was actually happening that I realised I had actually never, ever seen in a concert 3 generations of women performing percussion music before, ever. And it was unbelievably powerful, and since that time it's really made me think differently about, I guess, what might be possible for me in the future. And I've had conversations with my younger students as well, who also found this to be, you know, it was an unusual thing. And I think the fact that it's unusual and the fact that we're talking about it suggests that it is something that we need to be aware of, and that it is something that we need to consciously address. And I can point you to some really great resources if anyone's interested in that sort of thing further down the track.
It is the question. And if you extend that not just to issues of gender, but to issues of race and personal history, it is the question facing us today. And on one hand, in a sort of philosophical way, that question is relatively easily answered. We are capable of creating worlds here by programming, by inviting, by curating. And so if we can, for the simple price of just doing it, create a world that resembles the world we want to live in. And that means this diversity of programming and everything like that. Where I feel we need still more work is, first of all, how we treat that, what our policy towards that is. And I feel very frustrated when I am asked by journalists, which always happens relative to the programming we do at the La Jolla Symphony, which is also really self-consciously diverse in terms of especially with working with women composers, that question of, oh, I see you have a woman on every concert, and how frustrating that is even a topic, that's needed, that this requires comment. Where I think we still have more work to do is in extending the artistic experience beyond the level of programming and curation. So if you care to program music by people of color, by LGBTQ community members, by underserved populations, we can do that for those of us who have access to programming platforms. We can simply do that. But then what about the audiences? What about the critical response? What about access to recordings? What about all of this sort of second generation and third generation issues of openness, which in fact we are not doing very, very much about at all. So it's great to have an African American composer, but if the audience is all white people in their 70s, then you have failed on a fundamental level, because the people who should most hear that music, or who should be invited to be a part of that community, are not there. So I think that we're at the beginning of a consciousness moment where the mechanics are still a little elusive to us, but I think there's a lot of other levels to uncover.
I had the chance to be at the beginning of this year in Paris for a couple of weeks working with Zsuzsa Katri, a great Canadian composer, on a piece, and I visited there twice. So the second time I was there, she told me that they went to a concert at Cité de la Musique with Ensemble Intercontemporain, and it was the first time they programmed an African American composer, and that was George Lewis. And they even said that. So it was, this is the time we are living. Yeah. So, just comment.
Do you want to respond to how we selected this? In the selection process, we do not place an emphasis on gender diversity, but the application pool was diversified enough that when we made our selection, this was the result. But when I hosted PASIC Focus Day, so I hosted PASIC Focus Day in 2017, I received I think I received 265 applications, and from there I had to select 30 And out of that 265, I believe probably only about 30 of applications came from women. So in that particular selection, I actually took in the measurement of how to diversify the pool very consciously. But it was also a reaction towards the previous year in 2016, where there were no female presenters selected by accident. But in this case, we selected just by the proposal and how they fit into the theme, and this is what we have.
Yeah. Well, just to complement that, there were many different aspects that were taken into account for the selection of the people presenting in this symposium, and pretty much we have a jury of 6 people, and it had to be a binational jury because we had presentations sent to us in Spanish and others sent in English, so we had to split that, and I asked a few colleagues to be part of this panel, of this jury, jurors, and at the end, people who were selected were the people who were fitting better the expectations about the theme of the symposium, and whose work will contribute in a way. And this was a decision made by at least 2 jury members in a way of ranking. It was pretty complicated to explain it right now here, but at the end, I think the proposals were just strong, and those are the ones that we chose. By the way, Louise was chosen, for example, to be here, but she couldn't make it, and that it was a shame that we don't have her here, but we're lucky that she's on the screen. She's joining us here. So I think, personally speaking, as a host of this year's symposium, I was just very, very happy to see that we had a very wide variety of people presenting a very wide variety of ways of making percussion, and I think we have seen that during the entire day of yesterday, which seems to be like a week ago. Yes. So much information, and we still have a lot to learn to hear today. So I just want to say that I think it was a very fruitful thing to do, and I hope that everyone is learning and appreciating that too.
Should we wrap up? Okay, so we should probably now break for lunch. And thank you so much for dialing in, Louise and Scott. Diego and Roberto for coming up and talking with us. And we'll be back at 1:30. Thank you.